Welcome to my channel Learn English, where we grow your English skills through meaningful stories. Today's story is called How to Learn from a Mistake. It's about a man who makes a mistake, but instead of giving up, he learns from it and becomes a better person. This story will help you improve your listening, learn natural English, and understand how we grow through our experiences. Listen carefully to the vocabulary, grammar, and feelings in each sentence. You can pause, repeat, and even take notes. Ready to begin? Let's start the story now. This story follows Samuel Jensen, a man in a small town who publicly criticizes the value of music education, only to realize later that he made a serious mistake. The story unfolds in 5 parts, beginning with his mistake and moving through his journey of regret, reflection, action, and eventual growth. Sam's early arrogance and assumptions lead to hurt in the community, especially among students. Over time, he begins to listen, volunteer, and take responsibility, not just with words, but with consistent effort. He builds trust again through quiet work, earns respect back by showing humility, and eventually finds a place in the lives he once affected. Through this, he learns that mistakes can become powerful teachers if we're honest, patient, and willing to change. To help you practice English, ask yourself, can you summarize what Sam's biggest mistake was? What do you do to make up for it? Which part of his journey shows the most growth? Try retelling part of the story in your own words. How would you describe Sam at the beginning versus the end? Use past tense verbs to explain what happened. Practice writing a letter to Sam, giving him advice after his mistake. Finally, think about a small mistake you've made and write 3 to 5 sentences about what you learned from it. These exercises will help you build vocabulary, practice grammar, and develop confidence in using English for real-life situations. The weight of the pebble. The autumn morning began with a silence that felt heavier than usual. The golden leaves, once rustling joyfully in the breeze, now lay scattered like remnants of a forgotten celebration. Samuel Jensen stepped out of his small cottage nestled on the edge of Fernville, a quiet town known more for its stillness than for its stories. But on that day, Sam carried the weight of a story he wished he could forget. A mistake. A single choice that splintered the comfortable routine of his life and left a crack in his reputation that wouldn't be easily filled. It had been 3 weeks since the town hall meeting, the night Sam spoke without thinking, criticized without knowing, and acted without considering the consequences. He had been entrusted with reviewing a grant proposal for the local school's music program, a matter of pride for the community. Sam, usually diligent and fair, threw the proposal with one distracted eye and leapt to conclusions based on hearsay rather than facts. During the meeting, he'd called the project frivolous, questioned the principal's motives, and dismissed the passionate pleas of Mrs. Langley, the music teacher who had poured her heart into the proposal. His words, once spoken, couldn't be reeled back, and the room had fallen into an echoing silence that still haunted him. The aftermath was swift. Neighbors who once greeted him with warm smiles now offered tight nods or avoided eye contact altogether. Mrs. Langley, who had known Sam since they were children, had not spoken to him since that evening. Even the students, who had once eagerly waved at him during his walks, now looked through him as if he were invisible. But the worst part wasn't the town's disappointment. It was his own. Sam had always taken pride in being measured, fair, thoughtful. And yet, in one moment, he had allowed pride and assumption to steer his voice. It gnawed at him, the knowledge that he had hurt others not by accident, but through his own negligence. For days, he tried to justify his actions. He told himself he was tired, that he was under pressure, that perhaps the proposal was flawed in ways no one else could see. But deep down, he knew these were veils. Excuses. The truth was simpler and more painful. He hadn't done the work. He had acted from a place of laziness disguised as authority, and he had wounded someone who had only wanted to make something beautiful for the children. One afternoon, while sorting through old books in his attic, Sam stumbled upon a dusty journal from his college days. Between yellowed pages filled with immature musings and romantic ideals, he found an entry that startled him. It detailed a similar incident. A group project where he had dismissed a teammate's idea without listening. He had written then, in his younger voice, about the guilt he felt afterward and the lesson he promised never to forget. Reading it now, decades later, Sam was struck by how easily that promise had been broken. It dawned on him then, painfully and clearly. The lesson he once thought he had learned had not been learned at all. A mistake, unacknowledged, repeats itself, silently, until it no longer asks for attention but demands it. That night, Sam sat by the fireplace, the flames casting flickering shadows across his lined face. He knew he couldn't undo the words he had spoken or the damage they had caused, but he could face them. He could choose not to shrink from them, not to bury them beneath 1,000 excuses. Mistakes, he realized, are not defined by their occurrence, but by the response they evoke. To learn from them is to engage with them, to look them in the eye and ask what they're trying to teach. The next morning, he rose early and walked to the school. The halls were quiet, save for the distant hum of a piano. Following the sound, he found Mrs. Langley alone in the music room, her back to the door, her fingers gliding across the keys with a tenderness that pulled at something deep in his chest. He stood there for a long moment, unsure whether to interrupt, unsure whether he even had the right. But she stopped playing before he could decide, sensing perhaps the presence behind her. When she turned, their eyes met, and for a moment, silence filled the space between them. Then Sam stepped forward, removing his cap and holding it against his chest like a man before a judge. "I was wrong," he said, voice low but steady. "I didn't read your proposal. I didn't try to understand. I just assumed. And I hurt you. I hurt the students. I'm sorry." Mrs. Langley studied him, her expression unreadable. "Why now?" she asked after a pause. "Because I've been trying to run from it," Sam admitted. "And I can't anymore. I thought I knew better. I thought I was being practical. But the truth is, I didn't even give you a chance. I've been remembering a lot lately about who I used to be and who I said I'd become. Somewhere along the way, I lost that thread." Her face softened, and she gestured for him to sit. As he lowered himself into the chair beside her, something inside him released. Not forgiveness yet, but the possibility of it. They talked for over an hour. About the proposal, about the students, about the dream she had for the music program, and the obstacles she faced. Sam listened, really listened, and found himself moved in ways he hadn't expected. Her passion was evident in every word, every gesture, and he felt ashamed that he had once seen it as frivolous. But in that shame was the seed of something new, humility, the kind that opens the door to growth. In the days that followed, Sam took action. He drafted a letter to the town council, admitting his error and advocating for the proposal with the same vigor he had once used to dismiss it. He volunteered at the school, helping set up equipment, organizing sheet music, doing whatever needed doing. Slowly, people began to notice. More importantly, he began to notice himself, changing, rebuilding, becoming. Mistakes, he realized, are not ends. They are beginnings in disguise. They are the gravel on the road of wisdom, uncomfortable, often painful, but necessary to keep us grounded. Learning from them doesn't mean forgetting them. It means honoring them with better actions. As the music program gained momentum and the children's laughter filled the halls once more, Sam stood in the back of the auditorium one evening, watching them rehearse for their first concert. Mrs. Langley spotted him and gave a small nod, not a full reconciliation, perhaps, but a step toward it. And that was enough. For now, he closed his eyes for a moment, letting the music wash over him. Each note felt like a small absolution, not because he had earned it, but because he was willing to receive it, not as a reward, but as a reminder. Mistakes, he now understood, are inevitable, but learning from them, that is a choice. Autumn gave way to winter in Fernville, and with it came quiet days of frost-laced windows and breath visible in the early morning air. Samuel Jensen, once the subject of cold shoulders and hushed conversations, found himself navigating a thaw of a different sort. While the town hadn't forgotten his misstep, they began to acknowledge the ways he was trying to set things right. Some responded with cautious acceptance, others with wary silence, but none outright dismissed the sincerity of his efforts. It was a beginning, and beginnings, he had come to learn, were never as glamorous as endings. They were often awkward, incomplete, but rich with quiet courage. In the months that followed, Sam took on the role of assistant volunteer in the school's music program. It was a humbling experience. Where once he had stood as a critic behind a podium, now he hauled chairs, tuned instruments under Mrs. Langley's careful guidance, and stayed late after practices to clean up. He didn't ask for recognition, nor did he seek it. Instead, he focused on the small tasks, the unnoticed labors that make things better. It was in those moments, amidst untangling chords and stacking sheet music, that the lesson of his mistake deepened. Apologizing, he realized, was not the final step in learning from a mistake. Living differently afterward was. One evening, after a long day of practice, he sat on the stage steps with Diego, a shy seventh grader who played the cello with surprising tenderness. The boy, whose eyes usually stayed fixed on the floor, turned to Sam and asked, "Did you really think music was a waste of money?" It was a simple question, without judgment, but it struck Sam with more force than any reprimand. "I did," he replied honestly. "Not because it was true, but because I didn't take the time to understand. I thought I knew everything I needed to know. I was wrong." Diego looked down at his cello, fingers absently brushing the strings. "My dad said you're trying to make it right." "I am," Sam said, and, after a pause, added, "But trying doesn't erase what I did. It just means I'm not giving up on becoming better." Diego nodded slowly, then returned to tuning his instrument. They didn't speak after that, but the silence between them was different, softer, more forgiving. That conversation lingered with Sam long after he'd returned home that night. It reminded him that the consequences of a mistake often extend beyond the moment it's made. They ripple into others' lives, into their trust, their sense of safety. A careless word, once spoken, can shape how a child sees the world. That truth was heavy, but it wasn't crushing, not if it inspired a better kind of responsibility. The concert arrived in early December, a modest affair held in the school gymnasium. Folding chairs lined the floor, and twinkle lights curled around the stage. Parents arrived with red cheeks and gloved hands, clutching programs and steaming cups of cider. Sam stood in the back, not as an honored guest or a leader, but as a helper, a part of something he had once tried to deny. He didn't belong to the spotlight, but he belonged, in some small way, to the foundation. When the music began, Sam watched not just with pride, but with reverence. Each note played was a piece of a truth he had once refused to see. That beauty is not optional. That joy expression and passion are not luxuries, but necessities. The children played with abandon, their focus unbroken, their faces filled with a light no budget line could ever quantify. And among them was Diego, bowed dancing across strings with a gentleness that stilled the air. After the final note, the applause erupted like spring rain, soaking every corner of the gym with warmth. Parents wiped eyes. Teachers hugged students. And Mrs. Langley, standing at the edge of the stage, looked toward Sam and nodded once again. This time, the gesture was fuller, the edges of it shaped like peace. In the weeks that followed, Sam continued his quiet work. But he also found himself reflecting on how deeply our mistakes are tied to the stories we tell ourselves. For years, he had worn the role of the careful thinker, the one who always weighed both sides. But he had not seen how that identity could mask indifference. Learning from a mistake, he realized, meant not only changing your actions, it meant changing the lens through which you see yourself. He was not infallible. He was not above error. And that humility, once acknowledged, became his truest strength. One snowy afternoon, while walking through town with his scarf pulled tight against the wind, Sam stopped in front of the library and stared at the community bulletin board. There, pinned between announcements for potlucks and knitting circles, was a flyer for the new spring music camp. His heart swelled with quiet pride. He hadn't written the flyer. He hadn't organized the event. But he had helped clear the way for it to exist. Just then, old Mr. Kemp, the retired carpenter who rarely had a kind word for anyone, passed by and paused. "Heard you fixed the storage closet at the school," he grumbled. Didn't think you had it in you. Sam smiled. I didn't think so either for a while. Mr. Kemp gave a nod and continued on, and Sam felt something shift, subtle but real. It wasn't about being liked again. It was about being known again, slowly, truthfully, through the grit of changed behavior. He spent that evening at the school again, sanding down the edges of a warped music stand. As he worked, he thought about the nature of errors. Not all are loud. Some are quiet, failures of attention, failures of care. And while some damage can never be undone, the choice to step forward with humility and intention can become its own form of repair. Later, as the janitor locked up, he lingered near the piano, fingers brushing its keys in idle motion. The notes he played were clumsy, amateurish, but each sound was honest. Each sound carried the echo of who he had been and who he was becoming. The lesson of the mistake was still unfolding. It wasn't a single event boxed neatly with an apology and a ribbon of redemption. It was a process, a long, uneven path, and walking it every day was the only true way forward. By the time winter loosened its grip on Fernville, Samuel Jensen had learned that personal transformation rarely arrives with fanfare. Instead, it inches forward in silence, threaded into the texture of ordinary days. Where once he might have spoken with confidence born from assumption, now Sam listened with patience grown from humility. The mistake he made no longer sat like an open wound. It had begun to scar, not as something to hide, but something to honor, a visible memory of the turning point in his story. The snow melted into muddy puddles along the sidewalks, and with spring came new decisions. One afternoon, while helping Mrs. Langley set up for another practice, she handed him a thick envelope. Inside were forms for a community grant, a larger one intended to fund not only the school's music program, but to create a town-wide youth arts initiative. She looked at him, the same woman he had once embarrassed in public, and asked, "Would you help me write this?" He hesitated, surprised. "After everything, you're the one who showed me how to keep fighting for this," she said plainly. "And you've learned to read a proposal now, haven't you?" The old Sam might have chuckled, deflecting the moment with modesty or self-effacing humor. But now, he simply nodded and said, "I have." They spent weeks working together. The process was demanding. There were numbers to justify, curriculum ideas to flesh out, and countless revisions. But it was also healing. In their collaboration, they found a rhythm, not always in agreement, but always in conversation. Sam began to understand that reconciliation is not a single moment of forgiveness. It is a shared effort, a repeated choosing to trust again. Each draft of the proposal felt like a layer of trust built back, line by line. At home, Sam started journaling again, not with the youthful arrogance of his college entries, but with a kind of soft-eyed clarity. He wrote about his mistake at the town hall, the aftermath, the quiet redemption. But he also wrote about earlier ones, times when he'd spoken too quickly, dismissed someone's feelings, or stood by silently when he should have stepped forward. It startled him how many moments he had forgotten or buried beneath the privilege of being forgiven without having to earn it. This time, he didn't look away. One journal entry, written late at night, simply read, "A mistake is not just a moment. It's a mirror. What you see in it depends on whether you're willing to keep looking." The town's attitude towards Sam shifted slowly, not dramatically, but in gestures. A nod at the farmer's market, an invitation to speak at a youth mentorship lunch, away from the principal as she crossed the street. These moments didn't erase the past, but they spoke to the town's capacity to recognize growth. Trust, Sam understood, wasn't restored through words. It was earned through choices, repeated until they could be believed. One day, as he walked through the school hallway carrying a box of donated recorders, he heard a familiar voice call out, "Mr. Jensen." It was Diego again, holding a folded paper in his hands. "I wrote a song," the boy said, eyes bright. "It's for the camp this summer. Miss Langley said it's really good." Sam took the sheet music carefully. "Can I read it?" "Only if you tell me what you really think," Diego said, echoing the words Sam had once tossed carelessly at others. "I promise," Sam replied, and sat down on the bench beside him. As he scanned the notes, some elegant, others uneven, he saw more than melody. He saw a young boy trying, creating, believing that his voice mattered. And because Sam had learned from his mistake, that boy's music had a chance to be heard. The grant proposal was submitted on the 1st of May. Mrs. Langley and Sam walked it together to the post office, each step heavy with the weight of hope. They didn't know whether it would be approved, but that wasn't the only outcome that mattered. What mattered more was what they had built in the process: respect, trust, and something stronger than both: shared purpose. Later that week, Sam received a letter, not from the grant board, but from one of the students, a girl named Amelia, who had joined the program after hearing Diego perform. Her note was clumsy and sweet, thanking him for helping make room for her voice. "I used to think music was only for people with talent," she wrote. "But now I think it's for anyone who needs to say something they can't say with words." Sam read it twice. Then again. It wasn't addressed to him alone, he knew. It was for everyone who had fought to keep beauty alive in a small town with limited resources. But it also reminded him of something critical. Sometimes, the cost of a mistake isn't measured in personal pain, but in the absence of someone else's joy. If he hadn't changed, if he had clung to pride, Amelia might never have picked up a violin. That truth humbled him more than anything else. As the school year ended, plans for the summer camp took shape. Mrs. Langley asked him to run a journaling workshop for the students, storytelling through sound, she called it. Sam balked at first, insisting he wasn't a teacher. But she insisted. "You learned through your mistakes, Sam. That makes you more qualified than most." He prepared for weeks, writing lessons that connected memory with creativity, regret with resolution. When the camp opened in July, the classroom buzzed with nervous, eager energy. Students from across Fernville and even nearby towns filled the chairs, notebooks in hand. Sam stood before them, not as an expert, but as a fellow traveler on the long road of becoming. "I want to tell you a story," he began, "about how I learned something the hard way, about what happens when you speak before you listen, but also about what you can do after that mistake, how you can choose to learn and to change." He watched as their eyes lit up, not with judgment, but with recognition. Because everyone, no matter their age, knows what it feels like to fall short. And everyone deserves to know it's possible to rise after falling. The camp unfolded with laughter, music, and the mess of creative discovery. Sam's workshop became a favorite, not because he was perfect, but because he was honest. He didn't teach them how to avoid mistakes. He taught them how to meet them with integrity, how to let failure become fuel for something better. By the final week, one of the students had painted a mural on the classroom wall. It showed a single pebble dropping into a still pond, the ripples moving outward. Below it, in careful script, were the words, "Let your mistakes ripple into growth."